And getting to the end of my presentation, I really hope that our report and the insights that I gave you will help you progress on your sustainability journey in the boardroom. And that the following distinguished panel will really help to make it more practical and to have a digital dialogue amongst yourself with that. But I'm quite sure, looking at the preparations that we did amongst ourselves, that that's going to happen. So now that I've raised the expectations for the upcoming panel, I will conclude here, and I'm happy to hand over to Andrew Hobbs, my colleague. The floor is yours, Andrew. Over to the panel.
Thank you very much, Martijn. I think you did a fantastic job there, getting through an incredible amount of information. I do encourage also those watching the webinar to dive deeper into the report. There's lots of more content there that you'll find useful, as well as some really great stories from some of the directors that we interviewed. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Andrew Hobbs. I'm the EMEA Centre for Board Matters leader at EY, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. I'm going to introduce them now. I encourage you, for those who want to know more about our illustrious panel, who are absolutely the perfect group to discuss these topics, you can go onto the website, the INSEAD's website, and the event page, and find some detailed bios for our panelists. But I'll introduce them as briefly as I can. So in no particular order, I'm delighted to welcome to the panel Frederick Barge, Liselott Hagertz-Engstam, Michael Hilb, and Dominique Delport-Velmeiren. Frederick is the founder of Reward Value, a non-profit foundation that works to modernize exec remuneration through performance-based pay that better reflects long-term value creation and corporate contribution to society. Welcome, Frederick. Liselott is a chair and non-executive director of four public companies and two private ones. She also chairs the Board Impact Forum in the Nordics and is a board member of the Climate Governance Initiative. Welcome, Liselott. Michael is the founder of DPP Group and a board director of three company groups, Klingelberg, Kuhn and Singvaris. He's also an academic professor at several universities, including the universities of Freiburg and Zurich. And last, but by no means least, Dominique is a board member of World Smart Cities Economic Development Corporation. She's an advisory board member of Merity LLC, founder of Group Verdel Holdings and president of Verdel Innovation. And before that, she had a long exec career at the C-suite level in many Dutch listed companies. Welcome to you all. Let me just kick off with a sort of general question to you. You heard a lot from Martijn there about what we heard from directors, the difference between experts and beginners in terms of their progress against sustainability journey, the challenges, and then the focus areas, the things that you can really do to make a difference if you're wondering where to make change. So why don't I just turn to you to get some reflections on that? You know, what resonated, what didn't you like, and anything else you want to say. Dominique, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, first reflection is that I thank EY because this is another showcase where we can say that effective governance is instrumental in driving sustainability as a value driver. On the other hand, I'm always a bit cautious when we start categorizing in beginners and experts, because your starting position can be very different. If you're already in an industry where I would say it is already, the intrinsic DNA is already more sustainable, like, for example, organic farming or climate tech company, it's quite different than when you are in a producer of chemical pesticides or in mining or fast fashion. So the starting point can be very different. On the other hand, it's not because you're an expert that you cannot be hit by the law of breaking advantage, in that sense that I see, because I've been on boards already myself, that in the discussion of ESG, there is still a lot of greenwashing. So suddenly everybody was talking about eco labels and green labels, and now it becomes a bit more serious in that sense that you have to start reporting, and reporting, I would say, continuously, and measuring on the data that you are providing. It will be followed by a lot more regulators. So for me, the key challenge remains in how, as a board, you can start the discussion and the engagement in prioritizing what domain of sustainability you want to act on and integrate it into your business strategy. So for me, that's still a main challenge. Perhaps others can reflect on that, but the data are often lacking in order to feed the risk management assessments. So the opportunity seeking and even the risk assessments can be very difficult. When I fall back on the S, for example, the social component, from many years ago, when we wanted to showcase the benefits of having a diverse team and the effect on the corporate bottom line, it was already very difficult. And now, even with AI enabling or whatsoever, if I would say the discriminatory and negative biases of society are already implemented in your AI process or your algorithms, it's even overexposed.
Excellent. Thanks, Dominique. So I think there a question about different companies at different starting points, so perhaps unfair to be calling them beginners. The challenge of integrating, or the need to integrate sustainability into strategy, not as a side activity, and the importance of being confident and credible in the information that you're getting and how you manage data. Let me turn next to Michael. Michael, any reflections from you?
I think you did a great job with the study. I think not just that you show this current status, but I think what I find very interesting, when you go deeper in your report, you also show how the attitudes have changed, since last year and before. And there I found two numbers, which I think you did not detail number, which I found very interesting. When you ask people, how aligned is your management leadership team on the topic of sustainability? And here you showed actually that 67% of the respondents said, actually, we have quite some big division or different opinions in the management team. And this number went up from 55 last year. So I think we see an increasing kind of confusion, if you wish. But I would say that's actually not a bad sign. I think it's very positive. It's an optimistic number. Why? I believe because it shows the maturity of the boards. It shows that people have realized in the boards, it's not a topic which you can deal just technically, where you can take a lot of shortcuts. It's a topic which requires the board to have a very fundamental, profound discussion on what you want to achieve, what's realistic, on where you have to bring everybody along the way, the owners, your employees, other stakeholders. And I think this realization that it takes time, it takes efforts to get to that level, I think it's a great sign for the future to really make the governance of sustainability as well very sustainable.
Okay, great, Michael. So lack of alignment at the board level is not necessarily a bad thing if it leads to good and challenging discussions and hopefully decisions. Great point. Lizelot, over to you. Reflections on the report. What did you like? What didn't you like?
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me. I first have to say just congratulations to actually doing this research. I think it's super important that we keep getting more and more data on how we progress, because this is a challenge that is ongoing. I think the other thing that I'm kind of reflecting on is that it's the way we ask questions is also how we get the answers. To actually be a board member right now is very challenging because there's so much change coming at us at this time, and it's not necessarily reflected then back into how do you look at your different areas. I think one of the things that I found very interesting is this oversight versus climate pledges. I think that if you had asked the related question, were you even evolved to actually claim those climate pledges as a board, you would probably get a similar answer, that it's not that you're not just monitoring it, you weren't even involved. But that goes back to Dominic's point. And we discussed also earlier in the preparation, I think the key thing here is to actually get a sort out an understanding from the board members on what is the key priorities, and get that from the business strategy and the link between the business strategy. When that isn't happen, we will get challenges in all of the other areas as well. We will have challenges in remuneration. We will have challenges in the reporting. We will keep reporting on the wrong things that actually will not drive business value. And if it isn't driving business value, it's not going to be good for anybody. So I would say that is some of the areas that I find very interesting and very good that you keep poking us on.
That's a fantastic point. And some of the questions that have been coming in on the chat, for which many thanks, are kind of going to this question of, I mean, in the compliance conversation, it's this concept of materiality, but I think the way that you're presenting it as a business issue, and what really makes a difference to the business, is the way not only to get boards engaged and motivated on it, but it's also the way to navigate through this, complete spaghetti of compliance obligations that are coming, but focus on the bit what's good for the business first, and the rest can follow. Excellent. Frederick, last but no means least, your reflections on some of the things that Martijn talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and also Martijn for the report. Yeah, sitting here in New York with the UN Global Compact SDG Week, and when you kind of hear that only about 15% of the SDG targets are on track so far, and the remaining is either not moving or even moving backwards. I think what we have seen over the past period is that we have grown, and a lot of companies have created pledges and long-term ambition levels up to the 2050 and all being net zero. And then with the growth of reporting requirements, I would almost championing kind of just mushrooming, I would say, of an alphabet soup, it becomes very complex for boards as well. And the complexity almost pushes organizations into a compliant behavior. And it takes away the discussion of what true long-term value really means and how you can create that. And there are some steps in between that are kind of snowed under by the tremendous increase in reporting requirements and regulations, not only coming from Europe, but also internationally, and SEC here in the US, but also in ISSB. So lots of things happening there. I think if we can bring it back to looking at three capitals, so if we look at performance along a financial, environmental, and social capital, these capitals can actually strengthen each other and really create value for a company over a long time, because you will become more efficient when you use your resources, and you will create a better relationship with your stakeholders, which will allow you to be a more wanted companies, both by employees and customers. So addressing these issues are not, let's say, trade-offs or not issues that kind of take the eye off the ball. It actually is looking at it from a broader perspective. And I think the report really shows that there is progress still to be made, but we're also seeing progress. So I'd like to remain optimistic. And in light of what the UN says as well, let's make the second half of those SDG goals really a catch-up and see how we can strengthen the vision of those three capitals and move forward faster.
Excellent. So progress made, still to be made, but keep really focused on the business imperative and worry less about the compliance obligations. Fully support that. Okay, let's get into the specific priorities that we identified that Martijn talked about. And just as a reminder, these are around board dynamics, linked to remuneration, and then this concept of authenticity in describing and being public about your sustainability journeys. So on board dynamics, I'm going to turn to Liz a lot. And you mentioned at the beginning the integration of sustainability into a company's strategy, and talking about it in business imperative terms. What does that actually mean in practice? And can you give some examples from the companies that you're involved with?
Right. Yeah, I think it naturally, it's been quite separate. I mean, it started from CSR, something on the side over there, but in fact, it's been pushed quite separate still. And that also comes partly from the regulation and the reporting. And I'll give you one example, which I think is a super important topic, but it isn't a business driver. And that's for most companies, I should say. And that is the CO2 emissions. So the CO2 emissions is an outcome, but if you rather turn it around, for most companies that produce some kind of product, a circular product revenue would rather be a business driver that would include the sustainability and help drive the business. So if you're looking to putting KPIs in, try to find all of these types of areas or KPIs that also drives the business. So in one of my boards, also to get the topic going, I asked our management to actually figure out how many of our key clients have committed to science-based targets. And if they have committed to science-based targets, what does it mean if we're not driving that? Will we even be a vendor? How much of our revenue is at risk if we're doing this? And that becomes a much more of a business driver discussion than going into the specific end types of outcomes that is also absolutely important and benefiting the planet, and by that also the rest of us. But to use business to do the same thing, I think we need to come much closer to discussing these business driver types of measurements. I think the other thing which is obvious, which many businesses have already started to do, is actually to rethink your business model. I mean, we have been used to sell a whole product or even a whole service. Well, if we're going over to sell it by transaction, we can optimize how many are using many of these resources when we produce it, and it can be used in a much more coherent way. And that will actually also help the entire sustainability. But it's really about the topic to go back and think about, how do you link the business drivers with the sustainability to get a combined output? If you're just doing the reporting, which is really scary, because I see all of my companies becoming very occupied with that, without us getting the proper KPIs linked into the drivers. I think that is where I see the area. I think the other area, which goes to this thing, whether you're an expert or whether you are a leader or a lagger, several industries are natural leaders because they are in the resource areas. Then you have the majority of the businesses that isn't. So if you're familiar with this thing with scope 3, I mean, 80% of scope 3 in the world is 80% is in scope 3, which means nobody owns it if you don't look at the value chain. And to actually get that understanding and get that understanding back into strategy, to actually look at if we're responsible, not just for what we're consuming in our company, but what we're consuming that has happened before us and how we serve it to the customers, then you're into driving it into strategy in business, I think, in a different way.
Excellent. We've had very clear. We've actually had a question in from a member of the audience, which I think is a nice segue onto some of the things you were talking about there, Liselott. The question is: have boards started to think about carbon budgets in line with what we have for financial budgets? What is the progress, or what are people doing in this space, if any? Right. I don't know if anyone wants to comment. It doesn't necessarily have to be you, but
no. Well, I can comment from the ones that I know, okay. And I would say that also goes very much to some of the leading companies. They have started to do that, and they are starting to look at the budgets and the implications of that. But again, it needs to be coming from the business driver side. If it doesn't come from the business driver side, it's very hard to get that driver to be going. The challenge for all of us is to think about, if there suddenly comes up a regulation that actually says we need to do this, we will have a long way to go for many of us. So in that sense, I think it's important to start to get your arms and heads around what would it mean and what would it be.
Very good. Anyone else want to comment on that question from the audience? Otherwise, I think we'll move on.
Maybe just very quickly, Andrew, I think what companies also are doing, some of them, is really also pricing some of those elements already in. We're talking about carbon, but it could also be about water use. So what would the P&L look like if I'm actually now applying pricing of those externalities in? And that helps also to understand where you would need to focus on and what is really material and has an impact on your organization. So I see different models being used, but the pricing mechanism is sometimes also quite powerful.
Thanks, Frederick.
I would like
Makes a lot
to
of
add
sense.
that some of the frameworks that we use in our strategy exercise and integrating the business drivers and sustainability topics is pinpointing where in the, I would say, the existing processes you can already implement sustainable thinking as reuse, recycle, zero waste and things like that. So stay closer at home. And then for the longer term, you have to start a discussion in the board, and that's what we did with trying to get clarity on, I would say, the longer scope of your company. Is your company and your business model still, I would say, sustainable in the sense that it is last longing in the new world where we have to perform and measure everything on not only people, but also on planets and climate and whatsoever. So we reversed, I would say, the long-term strategy exercise with the board, also to get a higher engagement and also to make sure that we could make the right decision in what type of journey we would promote. If it's a transformative journey, like for example, I would say the digital transformation journey, which was already in place in the company, and we had the learning and the feedback loops on what works and what doesn't work, and now hit by the tsunami of sustainability, what should we do different? Should we make it still a transformative journey, or should it be more disruptive? And it came to, I would say, scenario planning with a very longer scope, and even discussing separate businesses starting up if we saw the behavior of the customer changing at the same time as all the sustainable issues coming up, and then assessing the impact. So it was a totally different strategy process with a longer term scope, where we also did a very thorough technology, that's my scope, I would say, technology scan on which new emerging tech can be used to make it a very sustainable business driver for the longer term in the company.
Very good. Dominic, I know that, I mean, you've talked there about sort of the approach to strategy, but I know you've got a few comments about kind of how practically boards that you're involved with have gone on to implement it. So how has that actually happened? Can you give us some examples, please?
Well, once that we did the strategy exercise, the next step is then the structure, and you start planning in what will be the future outlook of your company, what should be the structure. So of course you start with the board and you start assessing what type of board profiles do we need in future, given this, I would say, new longer scope. So that resulted in hiring 2 new board members, one that was, I would say, more a very experienced business leader who had already done a lot of transformational journeys, and then was trained into, I would say, the world of sustainability in a broad label. And the other one was in the accountancy, a more accountancy related profile. And at the same time, we nominated at the senior management level a chief of sustainability. And there we had even a conflict with the headhunters, because they all brought in, I would say, the typical sustainability officers' profiles, where we were more in favor of someone who could make a sideward promotion step in a company, because leadership skills that you need in a transformation journey are more or less the same in digital world as in sustainability. You just have to put on the right key drivers and the KPIs or whatsoever, but you need, I would say, the multidisciplinary communication talent to connect all the dots.
Makes a lot of sense. I thought I thought that was fascinating that that actually experts in change and cultural change and change management actually can play a big part in this, even if they're not sustainability experts. Thank you very much. Right, time is approaching, so I'm going to move on to the next topic, remuneration. So that was the second priority that Martijn referred to. Frederick, you'll remember from Martijn's remarks that in our experts and beginners, that experts were much more likely to include sustainability KPIs in their remuneration policy. What's the role of incentives in all of this?
Yeah, I think that's that obviously has been part of also a lot of research that we have done, but then maybe it's easier to kind of just look at it from this perspective. So I think the first question is, what is the role of a remuneration policy? So if you look at the role of remuneration policy in attracting the right people, or being able to pay people a certain level of remuneration, then being it only fixed salary or a combination of salary and shares, basically is giving you the outcome that you need, because you want to have a certain level. If you actually would like to drive behavior, and if you are in an organization where you need to have that change in behavior, incentives play an important role, because it's been also proven academically that incentives really influence behavior. So then in your next step, it becomes massively important to really look at the structure. So what are the ambitions of your organization on financial, but also environmental and social capitals? So what is the performance that you would like to achieve? And also over what time frame? And within that scope, you really need to look that you apply materiality or focus on those elements that really make an impact. So we see sometimes companies take a very broad look at sustainability and add a basket of maybe 10 or 20 different KPIs, and then link that to their remuneration policy for maybe 10 or 20%. And in our view, that doesn't really have any direct impact, because you're not changing behavior. So you need to be very focused, and also be very conscious that part of this ESG topic is a long-term element. So where the social element can be more tailored towards the shorter term, the environmental element really is a long-term play. So it is important also to make sure that you put the right measures in the right topics of your incentive plans, and ensure that the board has a long-term orientation. In your next step, I think the process is important. That's where boards come in, to make sure that you have the right people around the table, but also have the reach out to your stakeholders and shareholders, and really have a dialogue of understanding what are the relevant topics to take in, but also how the remuneration decisions are taken, and to what extent they have an impact to your wider society and organization. And last but not least, the reporting is very key. So why is this a journey, and why are companies struggling with it? Because we are in a learning curve in trying to understand what really sustainability means and how we measure it well. So by the time you would like to take it into in your remuneration plan, you need to have at least some experience to understand how you measure it well and how it develops over time. So I call that dry swimming. So a lot of companies need to start with dry swimming, understand how it works. And once you have that experience with your sustainability team, finance team, but understand how it works, then you implement it in your remuneration policies. But that also creates the credibility internally that you are using incentive structures that they can really also work with. So I think it's a process in remuneration there as well. And yes, incentives are really important to use if you want to drive behavior. And in my view, we are in an era where all companies need to make a transition. And therefore, remuneration, aligning that with a broader concept of true performance, is a necessity, in my view, to really stimulate companies to make that transition.
Excellent. I love that concept of dry swimming. We'll never forget that. Excellent. That was really clear and really logical. Lizelot, I know you. I think you might have a different view to Frederick about the extent to which sustainability metrics in remuneration are effective or even necessary. Do you want to say more about that?
Right. So don't take away that I think that it belongs there, but I think right now we have a focus where that is the key driver. And I think one of the reasons of that is, of course, that is what's visible from the outside. So that is what everybody can see. But I think also everybody, so I'm a chairman of 2 remuneration committees, and I think one of the things that is very obvious is that to actually get to the key drivers again, the key business combined drivers, if you haven't got to that, what most people are putting into those are, I mean, I can say what it is from the Nordics. It's really 2 areas. It's the CO2 emissions and it's diversity. That's what goes into most schemes right now. And it's very generic. But that doesn't mean that that is what makes the key difference for the company, for the drivers, and then along the sides then for the business and the planet. So what I'm rather saying is, I think as a board, don't forget that you have a lot of other tools to drive motivation and behavior. And I think that is also what you as a board need to drive for. And you and I had a discussion before, Andrew, when I actually said just the mere thing that it says something about sustainability in the remuneration, and when you have your performance discussion with your CEO, that's a very good thing. Whether then the metric is exactly if it comes up, but actually, if you at every board meeting asks about the drivers, that is a huge motivator for any CEO to be able to stand in front of them and say they haven't made progress. I think the other thing to just not just go on what you monitor, but actually go how you support your CEO. And that is to say, have you considered the executive programs that you put your CEO on? How much sustainability education do they actually have? Have you considered to actually ask your CEO to be part of a business networks of CEOs that has a focus on sustainability, that also helps you drive the ecosystem thing? Have you considered how you could actually maybe give the CEO a sustainability focused coach that person can talk about on how others are doing it? That is not just sustainability, but really a business experienced person that can get the integration going. So I think what I'm rather saying is make sure that you as a board pull into all of the other levers, not just the remuneration, because we know that if you only do the remuneration, you actually will not even get the leaders you need to move ourselves into the areas where we need to go. So I think that's what I'm saying.
Very clear and practical. Right, time is moving on. So now I'm going to move on to reporting, authentic, good systems and controls. And Michael, apologies for taking some time to come to you on this one. How should the board deal with this topic in your view?
Yeah, I think I'm very much aligned with was said before, I think, by Fredrik, Liselott, and Dominic. I think we clearly see the challenges, boards face with this topic, and I think it's also in the end comes back to reporting as well. In my view, what boards should not do is to emulate the audit reporting approaches they apply for financial matters and just try to copy paste. This won't work. I think boards need to be very clear on knowing what is their role. What do they expect from other parties to that? And I think they need to, in the end, I think, achieve 3 alignments. First of all, the strategic alignment, which means, as we debated before, the board needs to discuss what they expect. They don't need to be experts in all different metrics and frameworks. I think they can rely on other people to contribute, but that's definitely a pure board role. They also need to challenge what comes from business. They need to challenge what other companies do, not just try to emulate behavior of others, but really challenge and go and ask the basic questions. I think secondly, I think you also need a functional alignment, which again goes back to the question, do you need a sustainability committee or not? And I think, as was mentioned before, I fully agree. I think they should, in my view, they should really try to integrate these topics in all the functional committees they have in boards to make sure it's part of the audit committee, it's also part of the nomination, remuneration committees, it's sort of innovation committees. I think only by doing so, they kind of make it sustainable in the end, the approach. And then I think the third alignment is the operational alignment. What we mentioned before, it's extremely difficult to get it going, to make it happen. And therefore you need to involve the operational teams, the management from the start, and even have the management, what Liselott said before, come up with a proposal, come up with the measures. It's not something you can dictate top down. It will never stick, it will never be sustainable. So therefore I was saying reporting should really be approached in a slightly different way, as you might do with other reporting questions when it comes to sustainability, and really seek for these three alignments: strategic, functional, and operational.
Thank you very much. Just to the audience, please do keep sending in your questions. I appreciate we're not getting around to as many as we'd like. We're doing some in writing. We will also follow up after the webinar to answer all the questions that we haven't had time to answer. So we're not ignoring you. I'm going to ask a final question to both Dominique and Frederick before I hand back to Sonia to sum up on this reporting question, which is sort of, there's two sides to it. What does good reporting look like? And in so doing, how do you avoid greenwashing? And how do you avoid allegations of greenwashing? I don't mind who goes first. Perhaps I'll ask Frederick to go first and then turn to Dominique for some comments.
All right, and in light of time, I'll try to keep that short. What we ask companies to do sometimes is to do an assessment along what we would call the 4 Ps. So first of all, what is the purpose of the organization? So what is the ambition level stated also in the strategy document along the 3 capitals? What do you want to achieve? And then the second step is what we call practice. So what is the commitment made to that ambition level in input measures? So where do you invest in people, in R&D and CapEx? But also, how have you designed your remuneration policy so to make sure that you drive the right behavior? So what are the elements you actually take as an organization first to give content to that ambition level? And the third element is, and how is our performance on the short and longer term against those 3 capitals? And how does that relate to my ambition level? And how does that relate to my investment decisions I made? And then the last thing is, what is then the actual pay that I've given to the executives? And to what extent is that a fair reflection of the performance? And also a fair reflection of the ambition level? Am I on track of reaching it? So in doing this assessment over the 4 Ps, you actually also create a very powerful storyline where you can tell to the outside world, here's my ambition level, this is what I do about it, here's my performance. And I hold my people accountable, my leadership accountable, and that's the way I remunerate them. So that storyline is, in my view of it, I think, a very good assessment, but also a powerful communication way of demonstrating your credibility in this field and really driving long-term value.
Excellent, very good. Last word to Dominique.
Yes, I can perhaps add some practical tips on how it was done in some of the companies I'm advising or be a board member, is that we had a specific module in the training on sustainability on communication reporting, because we thought that even with the best systems in place and the data popping up, it's a mindset, and you have to be careful in your wording sometimes. You have to be seek a wording that is not only consistent, and I would say for your discipline, but it could not be negatively interpreted by someone else. So we did some training over there, and mindset was very important. Also getting the dialogue on a continuous basis of how to be transparent and honest in reporting whilst remaining cautious and wise. Because some of the topics can be, I would say, related to your competitive advantage. So don't start showcasing if it can be a very strategic topic without knowing what it is. So if you're not sure, double check with legal, double check what safe harbors are created, how you can mitigate in disclosure of information on some topics. But also, what are the consequences if you are not complying, and that you have to explain why you're not complying to regulation. So it comes with a specific training. And whereas in the past, greenwashing or reporting could be easily done by using traditional labels as eco and green or whatsoever, try to avoid that. Try to avoid the green flags and the symbols if they are not backed by data. Another point was, if you're in doubt when assessing upstream and downstream with your other external partners in this journey, make sure that you invite third-party experts to make a verification. And it's better to double check than not check, even if it comes with a cost. So some of the companies have put in place specifically communication points who can help, and it goes from, I would say, from operations until board in how to communicate.
Excellent. Some great practical and great methodologies to think through it. I'm going to bring it to a close now. Listen, I thought that was absolutely excellent, really rich content. I came away thinking that there was lots of support and recognition of the findings that in our survey, but more importantly, I think the main message that came out from me was the importance of making sure that this continues to be a business imperative and that it continues to be about the strategy of the company, and that everything else will flow from there. But there is a need, I was hearing a need to approach this pretty methodically and with some discipline, recognizing that it isn't easy. So with that, Sonia, I'll hand back to you. Thank you, all panelists.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for moderating and leading the conversation. It was so insightful, and of course, sincere thanks to our guest speakers here, our practitioners and experts. Of course, we can never talk enough about the subject matter, and we can never stop these webinars. So stay tuned for the next that we will be organizing and we'll be sharing with you. So let me, for example, what you will see here, the upcoming webinar that we will have will be on nomination and remuneration committees. So this is on the 6th of October. Feel free to sign up and join us. We also have a directors forum. This is physical on campus at INSEAD Fontainebleau on the 27th, 28th, and it's about pivoting the governance paradigm. And of course, here topics like digital sustainability, but also the skills, the competencies, the board model, board structure, all of these topics will be discussed as well. And then, so sincere thanks again for joining us today. And again, I cannot stop thanking our panelists here because I find the conversation was so insightful. And happy to actually share with you, we have a feedback survey, so please, you can either scan the QR code that is there. Otherwise, I posted on the chat the link. Feel free to go on the link, share with us your feedback, but please share what you would like to see as topics in the future as well that we can address. Of course, sustainability is huge, but there are intricacies within the sustainability and specificities that we can address as well. So please feel free. Thank you all again for joining. We are right on time. Good rest of the afternoon and a good evening for all of you. Thank you.